Hmm. How do I get the chat on now?
There will be a, hold on one second.
I see it.
You got it? Great. Hey, everyone. If you can confirm that you can hear us, that would be wonderful. And we can see Sneha right there. Yes, wonderful. Great. So I just want to introduce myself. My name is Alex Dreyer. I'm a research scholar and instructional design lead here at the Friday Institute for Educational Innovation. And we're really thrilled to have you continuing to join us here at the North Carolina Conference for Educational Equity. And my role here is actually a pretty simple one. I'm just here to support our presenters, and I will be monitoring the chat and elevating any questions that you guys have that our presenters have not addressed. And I'll also be dropping in that ever so important evaluation at the end of the presentation, which not only is going to enable us to get some feedback, but also will enable you to get your certificate of completion for the session. So make sure to stay tuned for that. This session is being recorded. It will be uploaded to our YouTube channel when we are all done. And so again, if you have any technical questions or other support, I'm happy to address that. But I want to get rolling. So I'm going to pass it right over to our presenters and have at it, guys. Enjoy.
Thanks, Alex.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. My name is Matt Makel, and I'm the Director of Research and Evaluation at the Duke Talent Identification Program, where we've been working with academically talented students across the state and the country for 40 years. And I'm joined today by my friend and colleague, Sneha Shah Coltrane, who is the Director of Advanced Learning and Gifted Education at the Department of Public Instruction here in North Carolina. Welcome to our session on realizing equity and excellence in gifted education. Also, welcome to what I believe is my first button-down shirt in about 4 months.
I chose not to go there and not to put on a suit. I hope that was okay.
So, as I'm sure everyone here on this session knows, that there are massive representation issues in gifted education that need to be addressed here in North Carolina and across the country. These issues of underrepresentation are both persistent and large. And although acknowledging and recognizing the existence and magnitude of the problem is absolutely essential, we also want to do more than that. We also want to catalyze action. And that's because in our experience, lack of awareness is generally not the problem. Awareness of the problem is pretty close to universal, but awareness and agreement on what to do about the problem is not. And so we wanted to work toward reducing and removing the barriers. And as our title indicates, we want to change mindsets, policies, and practices. And as we show on the next slide, Sneha's driving today, and then I'll turn it over to her. We also wanted to acknowledge and thank some of our collaborators who have worked on this work with us, including people from our larger organizations as a whole, but Jill Adelson, Beth Cross, and Stephanie Cyrus have also done a ton of work with us for this project, and we wanted to recognize them and say that this is their project too. But before sharing our work on these 6 critical actions that we propose are needed to achieve both equity and excellence in North Carolina schools, I want to turn it over to Sneha to give you some of the big picture context to make sure that we're all on the same page as we begin this conversation today.
Again, thank you all so much. Thanks to Matt and Duke TIP for partnering on this work with the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. This really is about all of us synergizing our work together across the country, across the state, to really truly make an impact when we think about equity and excellence and gifted education. So what I just wanted to share a little bit with you about is how in North Carolina in particular, it is, and across the country, as Matt has already said, the need is clear, the vision is clear, the foundation is clear, and our evidence is clear on how to address these issues. And so what our work has done is really bring together all of the best practices of equity and excellence, and how do we change mindsets, policies, and practices. So when we think about the need, as Matt has already discussed, the need of the issues of disproportionality are clear, right? We've known this for decades. This is not anything new. Yes, right now we have been given an incredible opportunity through tragedy of George Floyd to really bring these topics into more clarity for some people where it hasn't been before. However, many of us in education have known this and have seen this and understand our need. The vision in North Carolina has been a focus for decades on this issue, but we're not able to make the great changes that we need to. But in North Carolina, we're very fortunate that we have this foundation of legislation, allowing local context to be able to do, and our local districts, our local communities to do what we need to do when it comes towards legislation. We are unlike many states. Other states have a state criteria that really doesn't allow Murphy to Manio to do what they need to do. And when we think about equity and excellence, that foundation is needed. We can't move forward without having that local context. We also have funding, more than most other states. I know we never have enough, but when we think about equity and excellence and we think about gifted education, we're one of the few states who not only have a mandate to identify and serve, but also funding for this effort. And additional legislation that really supports advancing students in mathematics and other pieces. So we are very fortunate. So we have these pieces, right? We have a significant numbers of teachers across in every school district, but also many of you who are also regular classroom teachers and other stakeholders. We have in our state significant work in our IHEs, with Duke TIP, with our state organizations, as well as other movements. So we're in a really incredible place in our state to kind of bring together and truly have this call to action that is based in evidence, but can only happen when you have a clear need, a clear vision, and a clear foundation. And so we are very fortunate that we are poised in our state to make some of the most critical needs happen and to really make change. And so we have developed this call to action. It has been happening. We launched this last summer, so not summer 2020, summer 2019. And we have been taking small steps. And so you are part of our journey now, and we're so grateful for the 122 of you that are here with us, and we ask you to join this call to action. So with our call to action, what we have done is really looked at best practices and the evidence around equity, but also excellence. The Duke TIP and the department really believe you have to have one with the other. And that is really about how do we move forward with equity and keeping an eye on excellence as well. It is very clear that we have to do that through mindsets, policies, and practices. We have to think of all three working together, right? And in a three-legged stool. We can't just change mindsets, right? Because that is based on individuals and as well as cultural groups and norms. We can't just change policies and we can't just change practices. But what we have to do is change them all at the same time, right? We have to change how we think about things and the mindsets. We have to think about and change our rules and our guidance and our guidelines, and then our practices and what we do in classrooms, what we're doing in our greater society, and in our schools. So having all three of those work together really informed our critical actions that are all based on equity and excellence. And the goal of how do we continue to serve and meet the needs of those students whose potential we've already tapped in great ways. And we do that really well for some students. But then how else are we working together to truly tap the untapped potential, right? So you're talking about latent potential and manifested potential. Manifested potential, we are on it, and we have to continue with that so we don't leave any student behind. But then how do we also more intentionally create environments to truly bring out the potential in others? So that leads us to our call to action. Matt.
Yeah, and we thought, similar to what I've seen happen in this conference yesterday and today, we agree that I think there's some real importance about having clarity around what we mean by certain terms. And so we want to try a little interactive portion with the chat, although I know there's over 120 of us here together, so we'll try to manage it as well as we can. Before we share what we are talking about, what we mean when we say equity and excellence, we want to hear from you. When you hear the phrase equity and excellence, what does that mean to you? And more specifically, what is it? And we think it's also helpful to think, what is it not? So if you have anything that you think about when you hear the term equity and excellence, what are things that come to mind about this is what it is and this is what it is not?
And if you can chat that in, that would be great. We were going to take some notes, but that's not going to work exactly the way we had hoped. But just chat it in and we will call those out. So Matt, I'll call some out and then you can help synthesize as well. How equity is not equality. It's not just diversity, it is culturally responsive teaching and recognition of multiple intelligences. I think this means we're holding all students accountable for the same high standards and expectations. It's what's best for students, not quotas, not exclusive, not the same for every student. Giving students what they need, responding to their potential. Each student receiving what they need when they need it. It's not just for white students. Using a wide variety of tools to find gifted students, not just finding students based on one way. Oh, and then it left me. I had to get faster. Equity is the potential for all to be a part, but is not equal. I think the trouble is what definition of excellence we are using. Oh, that's really, really thoughtful. I'm missing some of your comments, so I apologize. Data informed. Equity is a path that provides the tools to someone to be competitive. Equity means, oh, I lost that one. Equity is not a pie in the same way of everybody getting the same piece. Culturally responsive teaching with access and opportunities. Y'all have some amazing thoughts.
Yeah, these are great. I also saw
fast now for me to keep talking. Keep going, Matt.
Yeah, I also saw one that said that it is not one size fits all.
Yes.
Doing well with your strengths. Access to information for everyone. Looks like, no, it's not frozen. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's also what they talk about is excellence should not be standardized, and that it's really about equity, is diverse in approach and product, not the same. Equity is meeting where the students are and giving them access to rigorous instruction to all students. And it's not disregarding things like developing English skills to recognize giftedness. I'm trying. Fantastic, everybody. I wish we were in a room with white papers up around the space.
Well, what Sneha was just talking about is exactly what we had done this activity previously in a couple different sessions, one with North Carolina AIG specialists, and I believe also one at a conference for North Carolina Association for Gifted and Talented, where we asked similar questions and did this type of activity that was a little more, I guess, interactive. Although these responses are fantastic. And so we took responses and feedback from those sessions to create this list that's actually on our call to action, where we highlight the responses that we developed with the feedback and input of many others. And I think you'll see, hopefully, some similarities between this list and what we're seeing here in the chat. So I'll give folks a chance to look through that briefly. So this list may resonate with some of your prior conceptions, or it may not. And as is very clear from the contributions in the chat, that I think there's many perspectives of what education or gifted education or equity and excellence should be about. This framing that we put fits what our efforts and what we're talking about in North Carolina, but given the nature of education and gifted education in North Carolina, even terms like equity and excellence don't necessarily have to have the precise definition and interpretation within each community in North Carolina. The way North Carolina Gifted and Talented Programming is set up, that each local school district can define how it's going to identify and serve students. And so they can also create more local, I guess, very operational definitions of what they're talking about when or what they're trying to achieve with equity and excellence efforts.
Matt, looking through this list, I think almost all of the ones, at least that I could read and skim when they were coming through here, really do fit into these. And what we have found is that working with shareholders, stakeholders, groups of teachers and district leaders or principals, etc., doing this type of activity about what it is and what it is not really helps to even start that idea of changing mindset. We've heard some people, thank you, Matt. We've heard some people say, oh yeah, my district's gonna stop this because it's not doing X. Well, that's really not what it's about, right? It's bigger than that. And how do we adjust those services based on needs? How do we really look at meeting the needs of all of our students and expanding those opportunities, not limiting them? What we have put in the chat is actually a link to the actual brief. Matt, are we ready to go on, or do you want to keep? Okay.
Yeah, I think we're set. You'll see this list that we have on the screen now is part of the brief.
So this brief is actually is a picture of the brief itself. What we want to do is give you a little bit of time to download the brief because we're not able to hand you the physical paper. is the link is there, and what we have done in this brief is taken together the research that we have found and really thought about a long-term plan. And so we've been doing professional development, etc. But the brief was really the idea of developing something that was accessible by many voices easily. It's a 2-pager. It has 6 critical actions. It gives an intro about disproportionality. It talks about the what it is and what it isn't. And then it goes straight into 6 actions, all based in research and that, evidence-based practice, and thinking through the how and the why. What we have heard is we have been talking about this issue for decades in gifted education and in education in general. but we needed to start repackaging it in a way that it got more traction. And this was, like I said, even before the tragedy of George Floyd and the opportunity that we've been given for this conversation. But it really helped us to repackage it this way and show very clearly what are the steps to help us. So what we'd like to do is to give you 5 minutes and chat in if you end up needing a little bit more time. But click on this link either in the chat, well, not in the presentation, in the chat, and pick one of the items, or if you're able to, read them all. But in particular one, because what we want you to do is think about what do you notice, what excites you, and where do you think you fit in whatever role that you have. We know we have a Friday Institute has brought together many of us here from lots of different ways. And so as a result, we'd like for you to think about where you fit in. So what we're gonna do is mute ourselves, have about 5 minutes for you to dig in, and then we'll come back and ask you to share.
Okay, folks, hopefully you've had enough time to take a look at the brief overall and get a good picture and take a look at least at one of the actions. And now in the time remaining, we're just over half of the time left, we'll walk through each of the actions of the what, the how, and the why, and then hopefully keep hearing from all of you about what you noticed, what excites you, and more on where you see yourself fitting in. You're muted, Sneha.
Thank you so much. Every platform, I forget what to do, but I've learned so much. I have learned so much. Okay, so the first action, reframing your lens. The idea of really reflecting on our own stories, right? Our own biases and what influences us. This idea of connecting with students' experiences, seeing students at potential versus at risk. Suzanne with U-Stars remembers that, and that is actually from U-Stars, the work with U-Stars, but this idea of how do we look at, how do we see students, and really intentionally shifting our lens, right, to at potential versus at risk. This idea of being a talent scout and not a deficit detector. I think we have several people in the chat right now really talking about that, whether you're a school counselor, Shonda, or Elise, this idea of they're already in honors, but how do I still keep looking for that talent? We have an AP teacher talking about that as well. The idea of opportunities to say yes versus no. Even just this idea of AP summer assignments. So often we say you have to do this to take that course. Well, what happens if that student has to work all summer, right? How do we help remove the barriers so we can say yes? How do we, from K all the way through 12, how are we looking for that talent, and not just in that 3rd grade or that 4th grade when we have formal identification, but how do we continue to do that and to reframe our lens so that we're not just negatively looking at this? So let's continue to look at some of your chats. The idea of what did you notice and what excites you. I think several of you have talked about really being more intentional of this opportunity to demonstrate that. The idea of moving K-12 and not just at a time of that standardized testing. Craig is talking about reframing our lens is important for both looking at our students, but also looking at more closely, how do we structure our courses, especially when we're thinking about high school. Some of us really do this well at the K-3 level, but then sometimes can easily end up getting more challenged into those pathways as we get into the high school time. I love this, is looking for that spark that leads to the fire of knowledge burning inside. We miss some gifts because they are not wrapped the way we want them to be. Very, very well said. So this idea of reframing our lens is really thinking about how we as educators, or whatever role that you're in, are shifting our own lens, understanding where we come from, to be able to see students differently. Now we're going to go on to critical action 2. Matt.
Yeah, and that goes to using equitable identification practices so that we can provide opportunity for all our students to show their strengths and talents, because we don't want to overlook their potential. And we have a couple hows listed, if Sneha, if you want to go to the next slide, please, of how that can be done. And the first, we start with aligning identification practices with the services provided. So just as something, hopefully as is easy to understand of if the service is going to be an advanced opportunity in language arts, should a student's performance in math really be relevant to the identification of students who would benefit from that service? I think probably not. But again, to begin with the end in mind of what are we trying to accomplish, what service will help us accomplish that goal, and then align the identification practices to really find who will benefit from participating in that particular service. And what that means, though, is that different programs and services probably need to have different identification practices. And this is not necessarily something that's going to be new to schools. Tryouts for the soccer team are not the same as tryouts for the basketball team or the school play. In all of those cases, the identification is aligned more closely with who we think is going to be successful in the particular service. But this can also mean alignment in terms of what the difficulty of the service is going to be. What would, we have to think about what would the consequence be of having more students receive a particular intervention. That may depend and vary based on what the intervention or what the service is. If it's a 30-minute pull-out program, identification criteria may not need to be the same as the identification or the qualifications for credit by demonstrated mastery that would allow students to test out of taking a particular course. The consequences of and what the depth of each of those services are may require different types of identification criteria. And there's a couple things that we have talking about universal screening and referral practices. There's been many research papers that have been published on this, including by Joni Lakin, who I believe I saw her sign up and may be in this room right now, who's talked about the value of universal screening and the number and potential of students who we may miss if they're never part of any sort of identification process from the get-go. Similarly, the idea and concept of using local norms and context for local programs. Again, my favorite analogy goes back to the soccer, basketball, school play tryouts. For all of those things in our schools, we don't require you to be the equivalent of an all-American point guard to make our school's basketball team. But sometimes for our gifted programs, we require the equivalent. And if we reframe our lens, as Sneha was just talking about, to thinking about what are we trying to accomplish with our programs, it's to find our students who may not be appropriately challenged in the regular classroom environment and who may benefit from additional challenge, then using that more local context would help us accomplish that particular goal in our identification strategy. And there's a lot of others, and hopefully we'll be providing more resources down the road to help you accomplish some of these identification practices and incorporating them into your school community. I haven't had a chance to keep up too much with the chat. So Sneha, I don't know if you've been able to see.
Yeah, I'll be happy to. So first of all, we will find out if, Alex, I don't know if you know if we can get this presentation to all of our friends here with us today.
Yes, we'll be able to deliver it, and it will be both viewable on our YouTube channel, and you'll be getting a specific email with all of the presentations. So be good to go.
Excellent. So great. So Lori, you'll be able to get all of that, and so that is wonderful. It'll also be posted on the DPI website as well. I do want to kind of address some of the chats. So this idea of local norming. So the intent of that is to not limit access, but to increase access. So this idea that in our classrooms, you're comparing students with their like peers, which is actually in our state law, to be honest with you. Our state law is one of the more forward-thinking laws around the country, but this idea that you're comparing them to their students of same environments and the students that trickle up there, then this idea is not to limit what we're learning or moving or lowering our expectations. But then once you have found those students, we then kick it up a notch and then ensure they have that access to and the opportunities to truly begin to achieve at a different level. Because what's happening now is that we have students who on a national assessment may not be at that top level, but in their own environment, they're at that top level. So our jobs in public education is then to help those students, right, at that tier move and move and achieve and grow and make progress. Because if they're never given that opportunity to grow and make progress, they'll never meet it. And so how are we getting those students into and giving and providing that access? And so by using multiple opportunities for students to show us their best and using those local norms what research has shown us, it will get more students getting access and those opportunities. So let's move on to well, wait a minute. I think there are a couple of other, so yes, so that's, I'm trying to also look at all the things to kind of clarify. That is exactly what we're saying, is looking at the top percentage of students, right? That's one number you can say, for example. So if you're an X school and you're in the top, 10% of that school, but that top student may be performing at an 80th, right, on the EOG, or 4 may be the highest in that school. That student still needs to be given that opportunity to grow and achieve, not just those students who are at the level 5, for example, when in that school there may not be a level 5. So how do we find that balance of what we need? Because our time is short, we are going to keep going, but please know all of you will have our email addresses. We would love to keep having these conversations with you. So our third action was about providing a range of services. It is just so critical that we are providing differentiation in the regular classroom, and that we're giving a variety of services in a variety of settings. That we are accelerating, extending, and enriching the learning experiences of our students, and also really addressing academic, social, emotional, and cognitive needs. It really is not about one service, right? If it is about one service, then that needs to be really clear, right? That it's only about this, and as a result, with this is what we're doing. But for us here in North Carolina, and even in this time of COVID, right? How are we going to continue to provide this variety of services so students are able to grab on and their needs personally met? It's so important that we're not just thinking about, oh yeah, it's gonna be this half an hour doing X for every student, but instead, how are we shifting the experiences to meet the needs of the students all day, every day? And so that is really important. Now, what I'm seeing in there, and I don't know, Matt, if you want to join in, I haven't been paying attention this time, but this idea of what do you notice and what's exciting you? I see some people saying this could be a big change agent. We know COVID, I mean, so many of you, Beth and Durham and so many other people across the state were right in the middle of giving COGAT. We know that that's going to be a challenge. But even without some of these formal things this year, how are we going to be checking in with teachers, regular classroom teachers? How are regular classroom teachers going to be providing as many different types of opportunities in this virtual platform, or hopefully in person? I'm hoping we have more doing that, so we can continue. I think it's very important that we continue to help our students thrive. And then I get to do number 4, because this is, I know we were switching, because this is a passion of mine. Suzanne, you mentioned it. So what we believe, and Ms. Pfeiffer or Mr. Pfeiffer mentioned, I love action 4, absolutely. How are we fostering this idea of talent development? How are we giving opportunities for students to show us their talent? You know, you're only going to see a student who can read well if you give them an opportunity to read. This idea of when you think of Chris Rock or Jim Carrey in the kindergarten classroom, and some would say if you saw them at risk, they ended up going to the principal's office, right, on that first day, if you can imagine those little boys in your classroom. But instead of saying, instead of saying, hey, write about what you did over the summer, the first day of kindergarten, or for those students, maybe it's about opening it up and saying, in whatever way you can, communicate with us about what you did over the summer. And then all of a sudden, you're given this idea of talent development, of seeing students' strengths and responding to those strengths through different domains. This idea of early intervention. I love, somebody's mentioning, I'm just going back and forth, this genius hour. Love it. The reason why we developed the advanced learning labs with Duke Tip was this idea of having exceptional learning opportunities for students kind of in multiple different facets of their domain. So we can really continue to find this potential as early as possible, and maximize on a student's potential. However, we can't just do it in K1, right, or K2. We have to continue it, because like some of you said, even in high school, we have to continue finding those students. So how are we fostering talent development? How are we giving students that opportunity to truly show us their best with different, a variety of learning experiences in different domains? So then as a result, it continues to help us give students what they need to help them achieve more and to grow more in our school setting. And your comments are fantastic, everybody. I love this idea, what Stephanie just said about combating this idea of imposter syndrome. Absolutely, this talent development can definitely do that for sure. But we are going to have to move on because our time. But Matt.
Yeah, and our next action is collect and use meaningful data. And I think what we'll talk about today, or how we'll talk about it today, is probably the most different of how we'll talk about any of the actions than we have previously, because the importance of collecting and using meaningful data is still around. But as many people have mentioned in the chat, because of the pandemic and going to more remote schooling, the ways and how we can collect and use meaningful data has gotten much, much more complicated than it has before. So I think this might be, at least particularly right now, and maybe even during other times, might be the hardest task, but especially given the unique fall context that we'll be entering and the unique spring context that we all had. But I think the overall goal remains the same. How we may accomplish it may have to evolve. I believe the basis of this, of like, what does it even mean to be meaningful? I think we have to begin with the end in mind. And going back to what Sneha and I have been talking about is align program goals with services and identification criteria. If you have that end in mind and that's clear, then you'll be able to start putting together what pieces of information can meaningfully help you find which kids are in your school that you think would have a good likelihood of benefiting from this program, and differentiating those from maybe the students who you think are less likely to have success in this particular program. And that's where I think there's a trade-off, and I think a couple of folks have been mentioning about local programs or local schools developing their own goals and their own services and their own program versus having a more centralized system from the state. That's one of the, there's a lot of benefit, there's a trade-off for both. And I think if you develop your own program with your own goals and your own service, you can really tailor it to exactly what you want to do, but then to find and collect that meaningful data that's going to find those kids, you're also giving yourself the mandate to have to tailor and specialize what those data are that are going to collect. And so there's that trade-off. If you're using something that is more established, there may have already be a set of meaningful data and criteria that already exist to help you find kids who will be successful in that. I think the elephant in the room here, particularly now, is testing. Testing has its strengths and its weaknesses, and a couple people in the chat have talked about how the limits of testing. Absolutely, I think one of the people who was chatting, talking about for talent development, about giving opportunities for dance and photography and art and music. All those things are great topics to provide our kids, whether or not it's in a gifted and talented program or not, but to use a standardized test for those particular types of programs. Those tests may exist, but I don't know how many of us are using them in schools regularly. And so that's where you have to, again, align what's your service, what are you trying to accomplish with what that means to be meaningful data. And a couple other people have talked about needing support to do all of this. Absolutely, if it's just you trying to do all of this on your own, that is going to be a rough and tough job to do. And so that's something where we're talking about the importance of forming a team who may have varied perspectives and various pieces of expertise and experience to help you know the lay of the land in your schools. And so what data already exists that you can take advantage of, and then maybe what new things might you have to do to be able to get some information about what could be useful, meaningful data for your programs. And I just want to say that if you're looking for a clean and simple answer to say, just do X, then all of your problems are solved as a general solution, you're definitely not going to get it from me. And I would urge you to be cautious about any of those answers that you got from somebody else.
That's right.
I think the process that we're talking about of beginning with the end in mind, of thinking of what am I trying to accomplish with this service, is a good way to start the process. But any kind of cookie cutter, oh, this is your universal tool that's going to be helpful and that this is what you should use for your program, especially if we don't even know what your program is, I would urge caution about that type of general advice from anyone.
The other piece I think that is super important before we move on, Matt, is this idea of there's just one of me. And I think that's exactly right. There is just one of you potentially in a school, or you may even be across multiple schools, because it's not just about you. This idea of these critical actions is really a school-wide initiative. It's really everybody working together to reframe our lens, to use more equitable identification practices, to use effective data effectively and meaningfully, to foster talent development, to provide a range of services. You know, those of you that are here from North Carolina know we talk about all day, every day, right? That idea that throughout the day, how is this happening? And so Steve and others that have talked about having several hundred students, absolutely, that is a huge caseload. However, when we start looking at each of your individual roles and how do you involve the total school community in this effort, will be clear and will be necessary. So let's go to number 6 because our time is about to be over. I think that is Matt.
Yeah, and I think in action 6, where it's about providing focused professional learning opportunities, this is where you build your team. This is where I think you build your team, where because it's not just a solo effort, but to have a team that has representation from many stakeholder groups, or at the very least get their buy-in and support. And I know there's been some requests for some tips to how to get some of that buy-in, and I see some links being provided in the chat. And also I'll give you a quick preview now, even though we were going to probably end with this a little bit, that our plan for the future is this is a one-page broad overview of all 6 of the actions. Our plan for the future is to develop individual one-pagers for each of these actions, where we'll talk about a little more how to, also provide examples of pockets of success where schools in North Carolina are already doing this really well, as well as provide some research and resources for how you can take the next step to implement some of these in your school.
Because so much about this, I'm sorry, Matt, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Because so much about this is a journey, and it's not just overnight. And so we started this a year ago, and like Matt said, this idea of getting our call to action together and getting it out there and really making it accessible. And now how do we dig in deeper, right? But still making it accessible and very focused. So that way it is not this idea of you have to read, 30 different articles, right? And so between Duke Tip and the department, our goal is to bring together quick, a synopsis of the research so people can go on and read if they want, but if you wanted to give it to your principal, give it to your district leader, it'll be there. And then the pockets of excellence. But this notion of really bringing people along with us on this very critical journey is what this is about. Because it is so much about the local area and how do we change our mindsets, policies, and practices. Matt, I interrupted you though, dear, with
No, that's fine. Thank you for that. That's great. Because to build on what Sneha was just saying, we won't accomplish our equity and excellence goals without that focused and sustained effort. And we need to remove the systemic barriers and foster this broad sense of ownership of this journey and this process from a number of stakeholders in our school and education communities. And I think this is something here where we talk about involving the total school community, including partners in and out of school. This may be another opportunity where local community effects may make what's offered or how it's offered look the most different. Just going to see what different partners in different communities exist will lead to unique potential collaborations. Greenville is different from Greensboro, which is different from Goldsboro. That to take advantage of those local opportunities may lead you down a different path than what you may have been if you're in a different community. And Sneha has this wonderful phrase that I absolutely love, and I've actually heard her use it at least once already today, which is all day, every day. And I think that's a great encapsulation of how we need to be thinking about how we serve our gifted and talented students and how we need those in our community to do so too. We need everybody to be thinking about them all day, every day, not just when the AIG specialists are in the room or when they have a meeting with an agenda item about AIG students. Because without this sustained effort, I think fewer students will be receiving the opportunities that they need to develop their talents. And so by coordinating all of the other actions that we talk about and presenting it to your professional community through opportunities to get them to be thinking about it and to give them tools, to be able to start thinking about them and acting on it all day, every day. I think that's how we're going to have to be successful. And I know we're almost out of time, but Sneha, I wanted to know, you mentioned some of the advanced learning labs and some of the remote learning resources that have been created. Can I share that link in the chat to the DPI page?
That would be great. That would be very helpful. Thank you. I can't get it. That'll be perfect. So while we wrap up and Matt shares that, we do want to, this idea of all day, every day, and it's not just about our student services. I think it is also about this entire call to action, right? This journey for equity and excellence in gifted education is in fact an all day, every day journey. And that's what we ask you to be a part of right now, and thinking of these 6 actions and what role you play in them, and how we can continue to support your local school district or whatever community you are representing today, here with us personally and professionally, on how to ensure that we are keeping fostering the talent of those students with all the foundation, and really helping all of our students thrive in their classrooms all day, every day. The other piece that we are doing is that really helping our districts, and we ask you to also do it personally, this idea of reflecting, taking reflection to action, and how you can look at your current reality. Think about your vision, your benefits. What are the barriers that may be there and the hurdles, and then how can you tackle those? But by breaking up kind of this grand idea into more accessible steps and accessible actions that are meaningful and evidence-based is how we believe we will continue to realize equity and excellence in gifted education. We continue to ask you to always remember why we do this for our students, for those that were already able to see their potential, but also for those students whose potential is yet untapped. And how do we continue to work for those students and create those opportunities to be able to cultivate and recognize and respond to their potential. Thank you so much. I know we are exactly at 1:45. We appreciate this quick time with you. Here you have both of our email addresses. We would love to be able to talk with you further with DPI and with Duke Tip on the shared mission that we have. Thank you so much. Alex.
Thank you both. This is a tremendous, tremendous session, and I trust that you all learned quite a bit from it, as did I. I'm going to be dropping the session evaluation into the chat. I'll put it a few different times just in case it gets lost, because I know that our chats can go fast. You'll see it there once. I will be putting it multiple times. If you have any difficulties with that, please let us know. But that is not only to give us some feedback on, again, what we as the Friday Institute, as our conference writ large, can improve upon, or at least, keep chipping away at, and also as a, maybe more importantly from your perspective, as a way to get your certificate of attendance for the session. So I wanted to thank you both again for really an extraordinary presentation. I will remain here just to make sure there are any tidying up in the chat or any other questions that people might have. But again, thank you so much for all this wonderful information. And again, this has just been really, really, really a wonderful opportunity for me to engage with all of you, and I'm sure for all of you to see all these wonderful presentations. So thanks again to our wonderful presenters, and we'll hopefully see you in the next session.
Thank you, everybody. Matt, you didn't get a chance to say goodbye.
No, thank you, everyone.
We'll see you on the journey.
Thanks again to you both, and thank you all for coming out, or clicking, as the case may be.
That's right. Matt, I'm going to jump off. Is that good?
Yeah, all right.
Okay.
All right.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Neha.
everybody.
Yeah. Do you need anything else from us, Alex?
Nope, we're all good. So you guys can feel free to hop off. Thank you for a wonderful presentation.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Alex.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.